Before I start the video, I just want to clarify that a lot of the footage I use in this video will be using fan-made animations since we currently only have so much official footage to work with. So I have credited the animators down in the bottom left corner, and there's a playlist of all of the animatics that I use linked in the description. Please go check out and support all of these awesome creators. Alright, on with the video. Continuing the trend of me expanding my channel outside of video games into things at least vaguely inspired by video games, today we are talking about Epic the musical concept album and eventual full production adaptation of The Odyssey. The final batch of songs has just come out recently, which means I have some thoughts about the story. But the difference between this and most other story reviews for some other piece of media is that Epic is currently not even in its final form, which means that they still have a chance to change things for the movie, stage production, etc. So in this video, I will be talking about some additions and tweaks that I would make to the story if I were in charge of that sort of thing. Which I'm not, and I am in no way meaning this as disrespect to Jorge's vision for this project. These are just some ideas that I had because my brain just does things like that sometimes without me asking it to, and I wanted to put those ideas out there just for fun. So here we go. First of all, I'm not sure how controversial this would be, or even like if it's a normal thing to do. It might be, honestly, I don't know, but I would actually want to add in a few short dialogue scenes here and there in between songs. Some people might find this jarring, again, I don't know, like having mostly music but then just some normal dialogue every once in a while. But I personally would have really appreciated something like this when I was first listening to Epic. I have a hard time getting into the story of musicals that are nothing but music, and Epic was no exception. It originally took me until the Underworld saga to feel anything for any of these characters. Yes, I felt nothing the first time I saw Polites die. Call it heartless, I call it autism, deal with it. But I think I actually would have gotten more attached to them early on if there had been some spoken dialogue to really ground me in who these characters were and what their relationships with each other were like, you know? And aside from that, I think that listening to Act 1 all the way through without knowing where one saga ends and the next one starts would kind of feel like it's just awkwardly jumping from one scenario to the next, so these extra scenes would help with the pacing in that regard because most of them that I thought of would be in between sagas, with a few exceptions. Exceptions such as the first scene, which would be immediately after Just a Man, serving as a transition between the prologue and the main story. So, right after he sings the final line, and side note, I actually like the idea of not showing whether or not he killed the baby right here, like in Gigi's original animatic. I'll mention when I would confirm that he did in fact do it later. But right after that, it abruptly cuts to Odysseus waking up from a nightmare inside the captain's quarters on his ship, but then Polites is there to comfort him. The main purpose of this scene would be to give Polites more screen time and to further establish the bond between him and Odysseus. Plus a few other things, like, there would be this one line, screw it, I actually wrote this whole scene out like several months ago and it's short, so I'll just read it to you. Odysseus is holding the infant over the edge of the wall and sings the final lyrics of Just a Man. Cut to interior captain's quarters, day. Odysseus wakes up suddenly from a nightmare, sitting up and unsheathing his sword. Polites is sitting nearby. Whoa, it's okay. The war's over. The fighting's over. After a short moment, Odysseus sighs, partially from relief, but also partially from lingering guilt over what he did, and lays back down, but does not put away his sword. We're going home. Yeah, just a couple more weeks and everything will be back to normal. A slight smile finally breaks over Odysseus's face. But his thoughts of home are interrupted when he notices daylight coming in through the window. How late is it? Oh, I'd guess it's pretty close to midday by now. Odysseus sits up again. What? He quickly stands up, sheaths his sword, and starts getting ready. Polites laughs. Relax. Eurylochus and I noticed you haven't been sleeping great lately, so we decided not to wake you. He's taking care of stuff outside. Odysseus does visibly relax a bit, but keeps getting ready. Thank you, my friend. But I should be getting out there. Polites hesitates a moment, not sure if he should say what he wants to say. Your nightmares, are they about... Odysseus interrupts him. It's nothing. After a brief moment of silence, he turns to his friend with a smile. How am I supposed to sleep when I'm so excited about getting home? Polites can tell he's lying. He takes a moment to decide whether or not he wants to press the issue. Then he decides against it, instead returning a smile. Yeah, man, I can't believe it's been 10 years. Has it really only been 10 years? Polites looks at him like he's crazy and laughs. Only? Odysseus is suddenly lost in thought. Yeah, feels like a lifetime. That little exchange is kind of like a little nod to the whole 12 years thing, which I personally would choose to fix in a full production if I were in charge of that sort of thing, which again, I'm not, but this would just be a little if you know sort of thing. Polites smiles understandingly. Well, it's about time we start a new lifetime of peace. Right, we just have to make it home. Polites walks over to the door. Well, Captain? He bows playfully and gestures towards the door. Your fleet awaits. As Odysseus opens the doors and walks out onto the deck of the ship, full speed ahead starts. The camera moves past Odysseus and up into the sky to give a bird's eye view of his fleet of 12 ships. Cue title card, Epic the Musical. Oh yeah, obviously those camera directions would only work for a movie, which an animated movie is what I'm mostly going to be imagining this as for this video, since that's what I would be most excited to see. But yeah, I think a scene like that would have helped endear me to Polites a lot quicker, so I think it would be a good addition. That's mostly it for the Troy saga, except that I would like to have some sort of similar exchange to what Murchie put at the end of their Warrior of the Mind animatic, but then it's on to the next transition scene. I actually have this one written too, but it's a little bit longer, and I'm not as happy with it, so I'll just summarize it. This is a conversation between Odysseus, Polites, and Eurylochus on the ship as they head toward the Cyclops' island. Eurylochus isn't sure about taking directions from the Lotus Eaters, but Polites tries to assure him that it's okay. Odysseus is silent at first, and then when Polites asks him what's wrong, he tells the two of them about his encounter with Athena. We get to see what the two of them think about her ideology, with Eurylochus being mostly for it and Polites being very against it. We also really get to see how Odysseus feels about his relationship with Athena, because their relationship at this point in the story is something that I honestly find a little underdeveloped with what we have now. But the main point of this scene is to really show the long-standing friendship between Odysseus, Polites, and Eurylochus, and especially some actual interactions between Polites and Eurylochus. This would not only once more give Polites the last bit of screen time that he could possibly get, but would also help develop Eurylochus more, because his character is another thing that I think is criminally underdeveloped at the moment. So from here on out, every additional scene that I talk about in this video will at the very least have a, oh yeah, and also show how Eurylochus is feeling about things at this point thrown in there. But anyway, while this is a mostly serious scene, I do want to have a moment where the three of them laugh together. Oh, and also, very important, there needs to be 0 death flags for Polites in this scene. It needs to pretend like it's establishing a relationship between these three characters who are going to be there throughout the whole story, or at least for those people who already know the Odyssey up until everyone else on Odysseus' ship dies. Then the scene ends with Odysseus returning to the original topic of conversation, saying that the Lotus Eaters' directions are the best lead they have, so they'll find the cave and then decide what to do from there. Then we see that he's holding a lotus fruit in his hands, showing that he already has the lotus wine trick in mind, just in case. Okay, I don't have any other scenes written out, so we should go through the rest of these a lot faster. But first I want to take a few quick stops in the Cyclops saga, first in Survive, where I would finally show that Odysseus did in fact drop the infant right on the line, "It's just one life to take," inspired by a similar shot in Murchie's animatic. Then in Remember Them, I really like the idea of Odysseus taking Polites' headband like in Wolfie the Witch's animatic, but unlike in Wolfie's animatic, I would want him to take it earlier on in the song so that he can hold it up the first time he goes to the higher octave, "Remember them," and then he puts it on his head while he sings, "His body is blocking the path, if we kill him we'll be stuck inside," showing that he is now attempting to adopt Polites' mercy, at least somewhat. And then, since this is an animated movie, we could do this cool trick with Odysseus' long hair for the rest of Act 1, where his hair completely hides the headband while he's being ruthless, but it's peeking through while he's being merciful or talking about mercy. And then he takes it off during Monster like in Gigi's animatic. But he still keeps it like in a pocket or something somewhere until the end of Get in the Water, where right after that last bubble of air leaves his mouth, we see that the headband has fallen out of his pocket or whatever and is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Okay, now back to Between the Cyclops and Ocean sagas. Here we'll see how Eurylochus and the rest of the crew are taking the deaths of Polites and the others, and how they feel about the fact that Odysseus seemingly messed up for the first time maybe since the war started. One of them, probably Paramedes, can also bring up how it maybe wasn't such a good idea for Odysseus to dox himself to the Cyclops. I think Odysseus shouldn't even be a part of this conversation at all, showing how the crew is already starting to see him differently. Then, at the end of the scene, very suddenly, the storm starts, and it goes straight into the song. So then we probably have the weirdest placement for one of these scenes, that being right in the middle of Keep Your Friends Close. It will be really short and still have the instrumentals going in the background, so hopefully it won't feel like too much of an interruption. So this would be right after the crew sings We'll Try. It then cuts to a later point where the crew is discussing whether or not they trust that Odysseus is telling the truth about the windbag. Eurylochus is there, but not really taking part in the discussion. Most of the crew don't see why their captain would lie about something like this, but Paramedes, ever the contrarian, disagrees, eventually bringing up the idea of just taking a peek inside the bag just to double check what's inside it, thinking that he would be strong enough to close the bag again in time before the full storm is released if it is indeed the storm inside. When they ask Eurylochus' opinion, he hesitates for a moment, but then says that they should trust the captain. This would hopefully tell the audience why Eurylochus would open the bag, well, at least somewhat making it seem for now like it was some random crew member that did it. But then it goes right back into the next chorus of Keep Your Friends Close. Then we don't really need anything between Ocean and Circe, but after Circe, I would want to put a scene before Underworld. We see how Eurylochus feels about Odysseus' unexpected success against Circe, but if he finds out about Hermes' intervention, then he would once again chalk it up to luck. Though Odysseus might purposefully try to hide this information from him, I'm not sure. Then I would also want it explained exactly how they are supposed to get into the underworld and find Tiresias once they get there, which would be however they do it in the Odyssey, which I don't know because I haven't actually read it since 9th grade. And then we'd maybe also see some other ways, that Circe helps them, like giving them food and advice and stuff. Oh, and while we're talking about the time that they spent on Circe's island, this feels like a good time to bring up that I still have no idea where those 3 years that supposedly took place between Ocean and Thunder went. Like, I know they spent some time on Circe's island in the Odyssey, but it wasn't 3 years, right? So I do think that should be clarified at some point so that any newcomers who haven't read the Odyssey aren't confused. Or heck, maybe just get rid of those 3 years entirely? I don't know, it just doesn't seem like Epic's version of Odysseus would wait around somewhere any longer than he absolutely had to. Plus, then Telemachus would be only 17 after the time skip, which seems a bit closer to how he's portrayed in the musical, or at least closer to how the fandom sees him anyway. Or if you really want it to still be the full 20 years, you could just have Odysseus stuck with Calypso for 10, or just something like that. But anyway, our final additional scene of Act 1 would just be a quick one in between the underworld and No Longer You, where they find where Tiresias is, and Odysseus says that he'll go talk to him alone. Then, similar to the beginning of Act 1, I would want to add a scene after the second song of Act 2 as well, between Different Beast and Scylla. This would start with Odysseus having a very short flashback to Circe telling him about Scylla, saying that he should avoid her lair at all costs, and that there is a way to get past her, but considering the lengths he had just gone to save his men from Circe, it's not one that he would like. Then we once again get a bit showing how Eurylochus is feeling. I would imagine he had expected to like this sort of change in Odysseus, but now seeing what he's actually capable of, he's not so sure. Also, it would be nice to mention that they're almost out of the food that Circe gave them to set up that plot point for mutiny. And that's actually the last full scene I would want to add. Everything else floats together pretty well. I guess I would want to add Antinous saying like, alright, or something after seeing Telemachus squaring up to fight him in between Legendary and Little Wolf just to make that transition a little smoother. And while we're here in the Wisdom Saga, let's just quick change Apollo's if that's true, release him to I suppose that's true, release him, just to make him seem a little less dumb. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Remember how I said I was going to suggest a few actual changes? Well, that starts now with the Vengeance Saga. Just gonna let you know right now, I have no idea how much of this video is left, but the vast majority of it is going to be for this saga. And for those of you who are skeptical about stuff like that, hear me out here. Like I said, this is in no way meant to disrespect Jorge's original vision, it's just some cool ideas I had. My goal with this is to keep as much the same as possible, while still changing the stuff that doesn't make sense to me. All of the major beats will stay the same. Okay, here we go. Let's get the one big thing out of the way. We're getting rid of the wind bag. I know, that would mean getting rid of the one appearance of the Winions in Act 2, as well as Jorge's sister's cameo, which would be sad, believe me. But like, the wind bag being here makes no sense to me. First of all, Jorge's official descriptions of what happens at the end of Ruthlessness from the live streams say that Odysseus slices open the wind bag. There should be no wind left in that thing, right? And even if there was, are you telling me that because a tiny bit of air was left in this bag, Poseidon hasn't been able to conjure up another storm for 10 years? If you guys have answers for those questions, please leave them in the comments. But either way, I think I've come up with a replacement for the bag that not only makes more sense, but also gets rid of some of the problems I and others have had with 600 Strike. But before we get there, there are a few lines in Dangerous that would have to be tweaked to compensate for this change. First of all, Hermes' entrance line. Keeping it as a reprise of an earlier song, this could be changed to something from one of Circe's songs, maybe something along the lines of "There might be another way home." Why Circe, you ask? Well, after the second chorus, instead of giving Odysseus the wind bag, Hermes instead gives him a spell from Circe, something that she's cooked up just for him in the 7 or 10 years since they met. I imagine this spell would be housed in some sort of object, like how her Men into Pigs spell was in the food they ate. Maybe it could be like a little crystal or something that you break to activate the spell, or something more rooted in Greek mythology that I just don't know about. Hermes doesn't actually directly say what the spell does, at least not that the audience hears, only that it's a little bit dangerous and that it should only be used as an absolute last resort, because the spell is so strong that if the user holds onto the spell's effects for too long without manually releasing it, it will kill them. This whole part will once again be using melodies from Circe's songs. If you wait too long, then you're done for. The spell itself will kill you and you're done for, sort of thing. Sorry, I'm not that good of a lyricist. Before we get to Odysseus actually using the spell though, I would like to make a few small changes to get in the water, just to bring that idealistic conflict from Ruthlessness a little more to the forefront again. So instead of calling him a coward at the beginning, Poseidon would call him a hypocrite with that menacing grin never leaving his face, which would then be followed up on by changing one of his later lines to something like, "First you say that mercy's right, and then give up your men in selfish sacrifice." I would vote on changing "Don't mistake my threats for bluff, you have lived more than enough," since that one feels like the most generic one to me. But then maybe still move it to the last thing he says before Odysseus' verse, just to hammer home the irony of him attempting mercy in this situation. Then I would also want to change Poseidon's somewhat lame and, in my opinion, confusing "I can't" to "Did you hear nothing I just said?" Now for 600 Strike. As Odysseus is drowning, he tries to grab Circe's spell, but accidentally lets it go and it floats away from him. Then he draws his final breath and Polites' headband sinks to the bottom like I mentioned earlier, but then, in the utter silence of the ocean, a glowing pink mist comes out from the spell and forms into an ethereal hand that pulls Odysseus' hand to the spell and helps him grab it. But then, in the moment it helps him activate it, the hand briefly flashes from pink to blue. I'm not actually as sure about this part as I am about everything else, like exactly how he would activate the spell after basically dying, but I do want it to be the spell that brings him back to life instead of him just being too angry to stay dead, because that sort of thing doesn't really seem like something that should be able to happen within the established laws of this universe. But once he wakes up after the spell is activated, he looks down and sees the souls of his 600 men below him that were just trying to pull him into the underworld, looking like they're just waking up from a trance. Polites begins to beckon the others, rallying them to help Odysseus, but Odysseus can't look Polites in the eye. On the other hand, Eurylochus and the others who died during the Thunder Saga are completely ignoring Odysseus and instead just using this chance to get back at Poseidon. But while they head straight for the water's surface, Polites and the others lift Odysseus out of the water, and the battle begins. Like in Dangerous, the Aeolus motif used in the instrumentals here would have to be changed to something else, but I'm not sure if it would be a Circe theme here too, or maybe Full Speed Ahead, though that one is used a lot. Or maybe not quite as thematically relevant, but part of the melody from the underworld could be shaped in a very similar way to the Aeolus motif that's currently there, like, down in the underworld, something like that. And I would want to keep the instrumentals as close as possible to what we have now, because the beginning of this song is honestly the coolest sounding part of the entire musical, in my opinion. But then, the battle. And if you thought that when I said I was changing stuff in the Vengeance Saga, that I would try to make it less anime, no. I think this battle needs to be even more anime, being twice as long as it is in the current song, with Odysseus being carried by the souls, using his cunning to command his troops one last time, and with Poseidon actually fighting back. Basically, I would want it to feel like a battle that either one of them could end up winning, but where Odysseus comes out on top because of his superior strategy. Eurylochus and his group never directly help Odysseus, but Odysseus does occasionally take advantage of an opening Eurylochus accidentally gives him, or anticipates a move that Eurylochus is about to do and attacks alongside him. Polites, of course, is right by Odysseus' side the whole time supporting him, but Odysseus can never quite look him in the eye. As the battle continues, Odysseus starts feeling sudden pangs of sharp pain, signaling that his time with the spell is running out, but he keeps fighting through them. They keep getting worse and worse until he's about to succumb to them, but then Polites helps him up one final time, and they strike the final blow to Poseidon. He then lets the souls go, releasing the spell's negative effect on him. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that, right at the beginning of Get in the Water, Poseidon summons another, completely separate from the windbag, another big impenetrable storm blocking Odysseus from Ithaca. And then, at the end of 600 Strike, before he gets stabbed, he's like, "You idiot, just because you beat my physical body doesn't mean that I'm going to take my storm away, haha," and then that leads into that whole thing, so that's how we get rid of the windbag there. Okay, moving on. Then he begins stabbing Poseidon. This part would be mostly unchanged until, after the line, "I heard their final moments calling their captain in vain," when he notices something and stops for a moment. Then he looks up to see that the souls of Polites and Eurylochus are still lingering, watching him. Eurylochus just looks sad, but Polites is horrified. Odysseus pretends not to care, but this is what prompts him to say, "Look what you turned me into." Polites and Eurylochus then depart, not wanting to see any more of what their friend has become. And then, when Poseidon finally relents, Odysseus hesitates, considering for a moment whether or not he should keep torturing Poseidon anyway. But then he looks up and sees one more lingering soul watching him. His mom, looking at him with her hands covering her mouth and a pleading look in her eyes. Only then does Odysseus drop the trident and begin to walk away. But then, a pained voice behind him begins to sing another verse. Poseidon taunts Odysseus, his smile returning more and more with every line as he tries to goad an angry response out of him. And I actually made an attempt at writing this verse, so here's what I came up with, and sorry that my voice doesn't sound nearly as cool as Steven Rodriguez, but I'm going to attempt to sing it anyway. How does it feel to be ruthless? How does it feel to know I was right? I didn't let you go 'cause you hurt me. I only did it because you earned it. How will your family see you? Now that you've closed your heart, you are a different beast now. People like us don't get welcomed home. You made your friends die in horror, crying as they were all sacrificed, after all of the pain that you've caused. How will you sleep at night? Oof, that was bad. But we all know how Odysseus responds to that.
Next to my wife.
Okay, now with that over with, I just have a few quick changes for the Ithaca saga. First, can we have Odysseus shoot Antinous through the 12 axes? Would that be dumb to have to choreograph the song in a way that he ends up in just the right spot for that to work? I don't know, I still think it would be kind of cool. But the first real change for this saga would be an I Can't Help But Wonder. It always felt kind of weird to me how Telemachus completely ignores the fact that he just watched his father brutally murder a bunch of people, not to mention how he committed what was probably his first murder. I wouldn't need this to drastically change the song or anything. I would just want to show a little more hesitation at first from both Odysseus and Telemachus. Telemachus at first isn't sure if he's comfortable with the monster that his father is, and Odysseus briefly starts to worry that the monster that he has become might not be the best father to Telemachus. But this would just be in like 1 or 2 lines from each of them before they decide that, at least for the moment, they don't care about those things and are just happy to finally see each other. Then, the final change would be in the final song, where I would really want to emphasize that Penelope is showing mercy to Odysseus by choosing to love him. After listing all the terrible stuff he did, Odysseus would openly say that he knows he doesn't deserve her love, but keeps begging for it anyway. And then Penelope basically says, "You're right, you don't deserve it, but I'm going to give it to you anyway." If we want to make these lines callbacks to previous songs, Odysseus could echo the "people like us don't get welcomed home" line from that Poseidon verse I wrote. And Penelope could say, "You're right, but even so, I welcome you with open arms." I actually think I would want her to directly use the phrase open arms, or at least do the open arms pose, as sort of a counterbalance to Odysseus's rejection of open arms when the suitors bring it up. Basically a way of thematically saying, yeah, showing mercy didn't exactly work out for Odysseus, but it's still a good thing to do. Which I kind of think it is saying already the way it is. I would just personally want it to be a little more obvious. Okay, Phil from the future here. Hi, after having like a week to think about this a little more while I'm procrastinating editing, I actually have a bit more of a clear idea of how I want to do this part. So I'm thinking at the end she could sing like, "Don't tell me you're not the same person, even if you don't deserve it. You're always my husband and I've been all that. It would just be kind of adding a line in there, which might be a bit awkward, and it kind of separates those 2 lines that go together. But we might not even need that, actually. That's just another idea, because the main thing is that at the very end, when she sings, "For you," right on the U, that's when she does like the open arms pose. She would be doing it in the exact same position, and it would be shot in the exact same way as we would have done at one point with Polites back in Open Arms, probably very similar to this shot from Murchie's Open Arms animatic. So that might convey the idea of her showing mercy all on its own without even needing to have that other line added in there. But then also, another idea I had was for the end screen, like obviously at the very end of the movie, it could be either before the credits or where a mid-credits scene would normally be, or after all the credits. It doesn't really matter, but it would just be the end screen that shows Polites' headband washed up on the shores of Ithaca. I don't know, maybe that would be a bit too extra, maybe it would be unnecessary, but I think it would be cool just to show that even Odysseus' mercy might not be completely dead, but it could, come back over time while his family is showing him mercy. His own mercy could come back over time because of that. All right, yep, that's all I've got. On to the outro. So yeah, there were my ideas for some additions and changes that I would like to see made in a full production of Epic the Musical. Is there anything else you would like to see added or changed, or do you absolutely despise my ideas? If so, let me know down in the comments. I am not in any way actually expecting Jorge and the team to see this, but if you liked my ideas and want to share this video around so that might be slightly more possible, I would greatly appreciate it. I don't really have any more epic content planned at the moment, mostly because I'm currently in the middle of 2 different video series, one on Undertale and one on murder drones. So subscribe if that sounds interesting to you, I guess. And I will see you in one of those videos or whichever video of mine you choose to watch next. Bye!